Wow, that's really flimsy. Not sure how this is gonna turn out. Ow! I've got a great beginner project for you today, and while this is probably more of a Christmas type project, it can be used year-round as sort of a generic set of corner shelves. So if you just leave it up, then you can decorate it according to the season. But most people are probably gonna wanna put this away for about 11 months out of the year. So I designed this one to be collapsible and have removable shelves. So the overall design is pretty common. It's not my design. You'll see it out there in several places, but I've never seen one that's collapsible with removable shelves. As with most of my projects, I've got a free plan that's available at the link below, so go and get that. And if you like beginner level woodworking projects that don't necessarily look beginner level, consider subscribing. There's a lot of those on this channel and plenty more to come. I'm using 1/2" MDF for the main display base, but I may be recommending 3/4 by the time this is all said and done. We'll just have to see. I think the 1/2" will be sturdy enough, especially with these big 8" hinges, and then the way we're gonna attach the supports to give it a positive stop. And then we'll have the shelves that slide in and also give it support. And I'm using MDF since the edges are gonna be showing. I could use plywood and then edge banding to cover up those layers of plywood on the edges, but that just seems like a lot right now, especially for a simple corner stand like this. They also charge you $740 just to stand in front of the plywood in the store, so yeah, no. My tree stand is going to be 6 feet tall, so I'll start in the corner and measure that 6 feet on the long edge, and then it's going to be 30 inches deep, so we'll measure that on the end. And then I'll use my homemade track saw guide to cut it out even and straight. If you want to make one for yourself, I'll put a link to that video down below. I've got the MDF sitting up on plywood strips to keep from cutting into the table, and I'll just lay the guide from mark to mark and cut out the pieces. I've got both of these base pieces pushed up edge to edge, and they're lined up on each end so they're perfectly in line. Now I'm gonna measure and mark for the supports. Doing it this way will help us get the marks in the same place on each piece. That way those shelf supports will be level. In the plan, I give the measurements from the bottom of the display stand to the bottom of each shelf support, so we'll go with those dimensions. What I'm gonna do to get these even is measure and make a mark more on the angled part or the outside part of each display piece, and then on the inside edge of each piece. And then once all 4 of those marks are made, I'll take a straight edge. You can use anything you want as long as it's straight. Connect all those lines, and that will be the placement for that shelf support. Now we can cut all of the shelf supports on the miter saw. The lower supports have an angle on one end that follows the angle of the base pieces. So when I cut those out, I'm gonna cut them about 1 inch longer than they're supposed to be, so then we can work on getting the angle. The upper supports don't have that angle, so I'll cut those to their exact length. To transfer the angle from the display bases, I'm going to extend this line all the way across. So now I can take this over to the base, line it up on this line, and then I'll trace that angle. And then I'll get this up on the miter saw and move the blade until it lines up with that mark. I think I've got it pretty close, so I'm gonna make a test cut off to the right of this line and make sure it's parallel. The good thing is this doesn't need to be exact, it just needs to generally follow the angle of the base for aesthetic purposes. Now we can use that angle to cut down all of these lower supports to their final length, and the line that we drew, the measurement we took, is the point of each of the supports, so it's the longest point along the support. For the shorter pieces up towards the top, we need to start with a longer piece so you don't get your hands too close to the blade. So I'll cut that angle and then we'll cut it to length once we're done with all the angles, and we can move the miter saw back to 90 degrees. I'm using an 1/8 inch countersink bit to drill 2 holes in each support, and then we'll drive 1 inch screws into each one to attach it to the base. it's splitting the pine. So I'm gonna have to step up to just a little bit bigger drill bit. I'm gonna try a 5/32 and see what that does. Wow, that's really flimsy. Not sure how this is gonna turn out. The only thing that may save us are these huge 8-inch hinges. Hopefully the 4 of those will keep these in place and then keep them from flexing, but we'll see. This may become firewood. Nope, don't burn MDF, bad for you. To position and attach the hinges, the first thing I've done is mark where the support is on this side because we need to drill into the back of the support with our 1-inch screw. This MDF's only a 1/2 inch, that's not enough to really bite into, and we don't want the screw to puncture through the other side. 3 of these hinges are gonna have 3 screws on each side, but this top one, the support is not long enough for this final end hole, so it's gonna have 2 on each side. So I wanna hold this up there flat and just move it around until I've got 3 of those that are within that support. Ow! Not sure what is going on here. So the result of whatever that just was to put a piece of wood down here to hold this piece up and then use my 12-inch speed square on the inside to make sure this is nice and square. Everything is held into place, and then I can take the hinge and press it up there, and I've got one hand on the speed square on the inside to make sure that stays square. And then I'm lining up the holes. So now we've got all those marked. I'm gonna go ahead and attach this, and that will help us with the rest of the holes. I want to bring you in and show you what I mean by positive stop. So we made the shelf supports on this side flush with the back edge so that when we set this up and swing this side over, it'll hit the supports all the way down and you know it's in the right position. The problem I'm having now is that it's not opening all the way to 90 degrees. You see that gap there. And the reason is because of that support right there, it's just a little bit too long. So I'm gonna make sure to sand that back a little extra. You also may be wondering why we did different distances on the shelves. So I think the bottom 2 are 12.5, 12.5, and then 10.5, 8.5, and 6.5 at the top. And the reason is, as human beings with a certain height, we're actually looking down at this display. So the shelves on the bottom, we see less of that, and we see more at eye level up more towards the top. So we separate the bottom shelves a little more to give us a better sight line to see more of what's on those shelves, and we decrease that as we go up because we naturally see more of those shelves. Now I've been sitting here testing this to make sure the hinges are working okay, and I actually really like the way that it's working. It's pretty easy to collapse this. It comes all the way together. The hinges actually make this a lot more sturdy, and they are heavy duty hinges, so that's to be expected. And it collapses down to a much smaller footprint, and I can slide this up in the attic. I've decided that a little later I'm gonna put some kind of latch here that when you collapse it, it secures it collapsed. These hinges are pretty tight, so they're not trying to just flop open, but I think that would be a nice feature to keep it secure as I'm trying to haul it up into the attic. Another thing I think I'll do is add another hinge here at the bottom, because this is sort of loose and we're gonna have a shelf there, so I want that to be more secure and stable. So I'll add a 5th hinge down in line with these supports. Now I'm gonna measure from the inside to the outside to get the dimensions for the shelves. Now I've got measurements in the plan, but you always want to reference measure like this to make sure you're more accurate. I'm gonna measure with this ruler just because I think it's a little bit more accurate. You can use a tape measure, that'll work perfectly fine. Just make sure that end piece, the hook, is straight up and down, or else your measurement's gonna be off. Now measuring from the inside corner to the outer edge, and I'm gonna err on the side of going a little bit short of the edge because I don't want it to stick out. In order to make sure that these blanks are square, I'm starting with the factory edge, and I'm gonna use a speed square and a framing square to get a nice straight square line. And then I'll use the shorter track saw guide to cut those squares out. Marking and cutting out each half circle on the shelves is actually pretty easy. I've got some picture hanging wire here. You could also use string, but the wire just tends to be a little more consistent. And I've tied a loop on one end, and then you just take a push pin or a nail, anything that's strong enough to hold this in place here in the corner. We'll tap it in like that, and we can pull this out to the corner. And then we'll wrap this around the pencil, make a loop, and we'll actually make a loop for each size of shelf. So you'll end up with 5 different loops on this when all's said and done. When the pencil goes in like that, you start in the corner and then you rotate just like this to the other corner. Now if you start marking and you get over here and you realize you're not going to end up in this corner, just stop, start in this other corner, and try to make them meet up somewhere here in the middle. And once you cut it out with your jigsaw, nobody's going to notice that it's not a perfectly round half circle. For each shelf, I'll secure it to the bench like I have this one, and then make sure the workbench is clear of the cut area all the way around. That cut with the jigsaw is not too bad, but it's not perfect. There's some stops and starts and some different places that are uneven, so I'm going to take the random orbit sander and try to make it look a little better. The bottom shelf is only 3 inches off the ground, and there's the possibility of accidentally stepping on it if you get too close to the stand. So to try to prevent it being completely destroyed, if it does accidentally get stepped on, I've cut 3-inch pieces from the 1x2 material, and we're going to glue them on the bottom of the shelf. The last thing I need to do before I start painting is to put these upper supports in place for each shelf. Now I still need to drill out these holes a little bit with 5/32 bits, just like we did with the lower supports, so that we don't split this soft pine. Then I'll put glue on the back of the supports, put them into place evenly on each side, and then as I drive the screws, I'm going to push down so that the shelf is flat, because I want a good friction fit. I want it to be removable, but I don't want them to be too loose. The top shelf is too small for an upper support. We wouldn't really be able to put anything on it, so I drive a screw through the top of the shelf into the lower support. Originally, I was going to do something a little more complex and put a latch here to keep this closed, but I realized we just need to keep this simple. So what I'm going to do is take the same 5/32 drill bit, drill a pilot hole, and then drive the screw all the way down until it sticks out about a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to use this 10-inch bungee cord. This is a miniature bungee cord, and it'll hook here. And then I'll do the same thing on the same support on the other side, and that way the bungee cord can stretch across and keep this closed. And those screws are on the bottom support, so once the shelves are in, you won't even be able to see them. If this thin bungee cord doesn't hold up, I can use a thicker one, or I can try to add some more to give it some help. I've got just a little bit of sanding to do on the final piece, not much. I want to get rid of the stickers and then generally break all the edges to make sure they're not sharp on the base pieces and then on the upper supports. After that, you are done and ready to put whatever finish you want to put on it. Most people are probably going to paint this, especially if you use MDF. I'm using a really durable paint that I'm going to spray on with an HVLP gun. MDF really soaks up paint, so be prepared to put on a lot of coats. Normally you would want to finish both sides of a piece of wood so it would take on and release moisture equally on both sides. But with MDF, we don't have to worry about that. So I will paint the edges, of course, and probably a little bit of the back just so you don't see the brown from the side. But for the most part, we're focusing on the front. And I don't want to remove the hinges and take this all apart, so I'm just going to use masking tape to cover the hinges up. So a couple things before we wrap this up. I mentioned in the beginning that I may be recommending 3/4 inch by the time this was all said and done, and that turned out not to be the case. I think 1/2 inch is the right thickness to go with on this project. I think the shelves would look a little awkward if they were 3/4, and with the hinges and the shelves in place, it's a very stable piece, and I don't think you need 3/4 inch. One thing I would change if I ever built this again would be the top supports. I put those on so that it was a tight fit for the shelf, and I really didn't take into account that I would be painting them and making them even thicker. So I had to actually go in and sand down that area in between the top and bottom supports. And then I still needed a mallet to get some of the shelves in. So make sure that the shelf sits flat, but don't worry about pressing down hard on the top support as you attach it. I'm gonna show you what these shelves look like all decorated in just a second, but before that, make sure you go get the free plan. The link is down below. This is an easy project that almost anybody can build. Don't forget to subscribe if you like projects like this, then head over to one of these videos and I'll see you over there.